Aaron Lutzi, episode 6, Second Nature. We are off to the races. How are you, buddy? Good to see you.
I'm so great. I got to tell you a funny story. I've been tracking all of our YouTube and newsletter and everything else. And this past week, I forgot to put a thumbnail on our YouTube video. So it's just a picture of your face. And actually, this video has doubled the views of every other video that has like the sickest thumbnail, the most provocative title, all these things. All I needed to do actually is just show your face
It's not
and just boom, views.
not surprising, buddy. Not surprising.
Unbelievable.
Face for radio, as they say, and apparently also YouTube. Well, man, I think we should start where we normally do, just like some feedback and shout outs and epiphanies. At least I had one epiphany that I'm going to fill you in on here before we get to the main docket. And we got some
Tell
great
me.
shout outs and feedback from some people that gives us, I think, even more confidence that we're reaching the type of people that we want. Do you want to start about some of the folks that you touched base with this week and I can follow up?
I would rather that you started, but yeah, I mean, the DMs are continuing to be flooded with the most credible and awesome people, and just thank you for all the good notes that we've gotten so far. There've been some pretty awesome people
Yeah.
lurking in our DMs, but tell me about the ones you're getting because I'm really excited about
Yeah, there
these.
was 2 digital and 1 in-person interactions that I had this past week after episode 5 of Second Nature launched. One from Dave Spandorfer, the founder and CEO of John G, which is a really cool apparel brand that is making big moves in the running space and that actually now sponsors Ricky Gates, an athlete slash artist that we talked about in depth last week. And I said, "Hey, Dave, we got to have you on the show. We haven't had any guests yet, but he could certainly bring a great perspective." They actually bought Wazell last year. Janji did, or there was a merger. So they now sort of own and operate 2 brands in the running apparel space. So yeah, thanks to Dave for listening to the show. Also, my guy, Ryan Sands from South Africa, champion ultra runner, a colleague and competitor of mine for many years. He reached out via WhatsApp, Aaron. He said, "You guys got to go 2 times a week already." So
I mean, I'm down if you are. That'd be kind of fun.
let's see if we can carve out the time. And finally, I wanted to give thanks to Emily Kraus, who's a great friend here in the Bay Area. She's a sports medicine physician and really like a leader at the forefront of female sports science. She works at Stanford University. Ever heard of it? Palo Alto?
Mm.
Anyway, we had a fun Wings for Life activation at the San Francisco Running Company on Sunday, and Emily was getting coffee across the street and came over just to say, "Hey, I love Second Nature." So again, those were 3 cool interactions, and I think more validation that we're reaching the type of people we want, and these people should all appear on the show eventually. So
Yeah, absolutely. Like there's some amazing guests that we should definitely be talking to and grabbing insights from them. And man, so many amazing conversations that could happen from here on out now that we kind of got up and running with Second Nature. You know, the funniest thing was I was at Sea Otter this past week, and I think just as many people came up to me to talk about Second Nature as they did about Super Rider, which for me I was a little mixed about because like it's a bike event. I've got this big channel doing bike stuff, but everybody wants to talk about Second Nature. And I guess I'm kind of here for that too.
we got to record a live pod from Sea Otter next year. Let's see. And Sea
Yeah.
Otter is going to be a main focus of our conversation in today's episode. But before we get to it, you want to hear my epiphany from last week?
Yeah. Hit me with it.
Okay. So this may become a running segment at the front end of our shows, epiphanies, because we had epiphanies to share last week too. This one was relevant to our conversation around the open role at Solomon, their global creative director. Myself, Harmony, and Ryan, sort of the core team here at Free Trail, went down to make a visit to this new hardware tech startup in Silicon Valley, like down in Redwood City in the heart of the tech epicenter of the world. This business is called Quilt, and what they're doing is trying to revolutionize heating and cooling of homes. They're just coming to market. They just announced their Series A funding round. I think they raised $33 million just it was actually a couple of months ago, but they announced it just last week. And it's a beautiful product and it's really cool. We're going to be doing some content around it via Free Trail here in the next couple of months. And we had an opportunity to go down and visit the team. And first and foremost, man, it was so funny. It was like stepping into an episode of Silicon Valley where you pull up to this small, indescript sort of office park in Redwood City, and they've got it kind of branded out. And you walk inside, And there's basically like one large room with the whole team working together. And as soon as you step into the room, you can sort of feel the energy of these like hyper intelligent software and hardware engineers collaborating on something that they hope is going to make a massive difference in the world. And it was actually funny because when you walk into that big room, the engineering department, if you could call it that, it's a team of, the total team is 30 people, but the engineers sort of sit near the entrance of the room. And somebody made the joke like, yeah, this is the IQ side of the room, and the EQ side of the room is on the far end, meaning like the marketing people, the business people, etc. So a funny joke relevant to, the Silicon Valley watchers of that sort of sitcom back in the day. But anyway, the reason I wanted to bring this up is that we had an opportunity to meet the creative director of Quilt. And because we had just recorded our podcast about this, I made the point to ask her, what does that practically mean to be the creative director? And you can tell this individual is like hyper competent, hyper intelligent person. And she sort of thinks for a second and then responds, I sort of exist at the intersection of brand and product. So that was my epiphany, is that that's really what the creative director's job probably is in most cases, whether you're in this hardware tech startup or you're applying for a job at Solomon. I thought it was just an elegant way to describe something that I'm not sure we did a fantastic job of explaining last week, of like determining what the mission of your company is and then what the product is going to be to help you fulfill that mission, identifying like who your customer truly is and crafting the product specifically for that person's need, in this case including the user interface for their heating and cooling system. So how do they interact with our product, layering then on the marketing and the storytelling and the messaging that you think will resonate with that customer. And I wanted to just bring a free trail example before I shut up and let you respond. I was thinking about this, like if I were thinking of myself as the creative director of Free Trail, one of our taglines is trail running will save the world. And that's something that, has sort of gone viral, or people identify with us and our brand. It sort of becomes sort of our mission statement, more or less. And then if that's our mission, then what are our products? It's our content, it's our community, it's our events, things that you and I have talked about on the podcast. So the creative director role, right? If that's me, more or less, would be to figure out how to bring the trail running will save the world attitude to each one of those product touch points, content, community, events. So anyway, the intersection of brand and product equals creative director. Your response, Lutzi, to my epiphany.
When it comes to the creative director role at Solomon, I hope that they have an external hire. And here's why. Because when you work at a company, you have essentially like this internal marketing. You think about storytelling that you do as a brand. Well, there's just as much of that storytelling inside the brand as well. And what happens and what can happen is that Solomon is kind of busy telling their own story to themselves. Oh, we're this. And we kind of called out like, oh, it's interesting. They're making road running shoes as in addition to mountain running shoes, which you look at all the other things you're doing are in the mountains. Is the internal story that they're telling themselves actually, we're a running brand, we're a running brand. And that person who's going to come from the outside is going to come in and say, no, you're not. You're a mountain brand. Like, why aren't you over here, here, and here doing these things? Let me give you an anecdote from my days at Red Bull. This one blew a lot of people's minds. There was a period of time where everyone at Red Bull thought that there was a delineation between people that bought Monster and people that bought Red Bull. And Red Bull views themselves, their internal story is that we sell a premium product. Our can costs more than the other guy. That means that the people that buy a Red Bull are a different class, a different style of people who are willing to pay for premium stuff. And people that buy Monster are not in that class, and they're just going for the cheapest stuff. And they are two different groups of people, period. And this went on for almost my entire career at Red Bull. They just assumed that there were two different kinds of people. And it wasn't until maybe like the last year or two that I was there that they got this study and they realized that actually the overlap between people that drank Monster and Red Bull was like 95%. So people were just switching back and forth. Like people weren't loyal to either one of the brands. They just was like, well, whatever's within arm's reach, I'm going to have. And that completely broke the brains of everybody at Red Bull. And I think it's because a lot of people stayed at Red Bull and continued telling themselves that story. And every single time someone else would come in, they'd inculcate them with that as well. So everybody's thinking the same exact story for decades upon decades. Meanwhile, they've lost this opportunity to reach out to a market that was willing to buy their product this entire time. And so to bring it all back together, I hope that when Solomon brings in this new creative director, that person has the wisdom and foresight to break whatever internal storytelling they have at Solomon and get them to focus in on what the outside vision is, what people expect from them as a brand.
Awesome. What a great start, dude. Any other epiphanies before we get to the docket today?
I think that's all I got. My
Okay.
brain's
All right, so the main topic of today's show is going to be Aaron Lutzi's trip to Sea Otter, the very important event trade show for the bike industry that takes place in Monterey, California every year. Then we're going to talk about some stuff happening in Lutzi's hometown of Portland, Oregon, obviously the hometown of many of the largest brands in the footwear and apparel industry. There's some interesting stuff happening there. And then, of course, we'll close with BPC, brand product content. Lutzi, starting with Sea Otter, you left your job only a couple of weeks ago to focus full time on the bike industry. You are all in. Before we get to some of the details, quick high level gut check on the industry. Are you reevaluating the fact that you left your job? Are you questioning your life decisions at this point?
always. I'm always questioning my life decisions. Nothing has changed. I would say that Sea Otter was definitely meant to be sort of a vibe check. How is the industry doing? What's the latest? What's the mood? What's the expectation? What are people asking for? What are they looking for when it comes to building relationships or building out programs and plans and all those kind of things? So for me, I had an idea going into it, what to expect, but I wanted to kind of see it in person. And I would say that my results were kind of mixed. I saw a lot of really good things, and I saw, well, a couple handful of things that maybe weren't that positive. I think the end story is that things are trending back to normal, but there's still going to be some bumpy periods along this transition. And we got a couple of those on the way into the event. Two bike brands actually shuttered essentially the week of Sea Otter. So Kona, which is one of the more iconic mountain bike brands, and another Finnish brand called Pole, both shut down and effectively are up for sale or, kind of uncertain futures for both those brands. And that's sort of an interesting way to start the week. It was definitely the topic on everybody's discussion of what's going to happen now. There were plenty of people kind of walking around looking for their next thing or having conversations and stuff like that. And those two brands are not the only two brands that have unfortunately come to this conclusion in the last 6 months. Just as a quick rundown, essentially what happened in the mountain bike world was the pandemic hit. Lots of people got into mountain biking because it was something they could do outdoors. There was a massive run on every single bike. You couldn't get bikes or bike parts for a really long time. All the companies responded by ordering more inventory. And then the pandemic and everything kind of ebbed. And all the bike companies were essentially left holding the bag with all this extra inventory. The companies that were really, really conservative and kind of smart about their inventory and how they were dealing with it seemed to kind of be able to ride it out. Some companies made other decisions that put them in a spot where they just had excess inventory, which really dragged down just their ability to function and keep the lights on. And we've seen more than a few brands shutter in the past 6 months as a result. And I expect that probably these two brands aren't the last two brands, unfortunately. I'm sure there will be more. So that was a really kind of interesting way for the week to start. But of all the times I've been to Sea Otter, I think this was the most amount of vendors I've ever
Hmm.
seen at any kind of event like this before. Certainly Sea Otter. Last year was big, but this year felt bigger. I actually left after 4 days thinking that I'd missed about 50% of the vendors that were even there. There were brands I didn't see, there were people I didn't see. It was just overwhelming how many people. If you're not familiar with Sea Otter, the Laguna Seca Raceway, it's like a MotoGP track. They take the entire infield of a racetrack and cover it with 10 by 10 booths, and it's just incredible. I mean, it's a big reunion for the bike industry, and it's a chance for people to show off all their new stuff for the
Go
season.
one step deeper on that. Like for those who don't know, like the what is Sea Otter and why has it become so important and significant to the bike industry? And maybe explain the difference between the race itself and the trade show.
Sea Otter is really kind of the season kickoff for everything in North America. There's not really much of a race series anymore here in the US. There's a couple, but nothing major. There's the UCI World Series that goes all over the world. th- Sea Otter is really kind of the kickoff where everybody comes together into one place. The racing is kind of just a side benefit. The dual slalom is kind of a special moment
Is
where
it
everybody gets
though?
together.
Because I mean, again, I've never been to Sea Otter, but I follow a lot of the folks that were there to race, including our mutual friend Payson McKelvin, and he put up a post that he was all pumped to finish seventh in what felt to me like the main event of the racing part of the weekend. And that's
Yes.
part of the Lifetime Grand Prix. And is it
Yes, but slalom is where it's at. Spectator wise, slalom is where it's at.
okay?
I refuse to accept any other answer.
And the slalom event is like kind of more of a casual all-star game where Payson's event is actually more of a high octane knockdown drag out type race.
Yeah, well, the slalom happens on one hill, so everybody can see 100% of the race. The endurance events that happen there, you see them when they start the race, and then like 4 hours later, they come back, basically. So I don't know. They're, the lifetime part of it has a big hand in like the meaning behind the event, and surely it's important. I'm not trying to downplay Payson or any of the racers that are in it, but the slalom is like the spectator thing where everybody gets together. If you walk up and down the hill, you'll see every single pro and every single marketing manager. Everybody's all just lined up having a good time watching the show, and it's always just crazy.
So for our listeners,
Mm.
Lifetime owns Sea Otter. This is the kickoff of the Lifetime Grand Prix, which is, correct me if I'm wrong, Aaron, but the preeminent off-road cycling series in the United States, a bunch of different events, including like the Leadville 100 and the Big Sugar, etc., the circuit that Payson races on. Lifetime also owns Leadville and the Leadville race series, including the Leadville 100 foot race, which listeners from my circles will identify with. And they also, of course, own thousands of gyms around the country. And it feels like this is sort of a unique part of their portfolio in that it's a trade show. You mentioned that this is sort of a dynamic time in the mountain biking industry and that there's a lot of overhanging question marks. You know that I've had the dream to create sort of the Sea Otter of trail running, which is something that I continue to work on and that you know all about behind the scenes. But I wonder if maybe there's something that the trail running industry can learn from this, maybe to tee you up on that. Because one of the things I'm always paranoid about is when our sport is going to experience a little bit of this market exhalation or a reduction of demand. At least that's the perception that I have. Trail running has been on this exponential growth trajectory for 15, 20 years at this point, and every time you think it's going to slow down, it grows by another 30%. And brands like Lululemon then invest however many thousands of dollars to do their big hero brand activation around it. So there's no evidence to indicate that trail running is on the doorstep of that type of a market slowdown. But I bet there's few people that anticipated the slowdown that's occurred in mountain biking. So, with that as your prompt, is there anything that the industry has learned or any discussions that were evolving about, maybe how trail runners could prepare themselves or the trail running industry could avoid a similar situation?
I do think that a big reason why the mountain bike world is struggling like this is the actual cost of inventory, where a bike landed is thousands of dollars still at dealer price, whereas in trail running, your shoes and your soft goods and stuff, you're never going to have that big of a swing. So I think that the range when it comes to holding on to bike inventory is probably a way bigger swing than than a lot of the soft goods and stuff.
So in
I
other
also
words,
think
if you don't hit your sales numbers, it puts the business under pressure a lot quicker than if you're not selling as many shoes, just by virtue of the fact that your overhead expenses are likely significantly higher.
absolutely, and the margin on bikes is not that great. So I think compared to trail running, so I've got to imagine that you wouldn't see as big of a swing. You wouldn't see as much pressure. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, because you know me, buddy. I'm always
Mm.
paranoid. I'm always looking over my shoulder. Even when good things happen, I'm just sort of coming up with some random excuses as to how it was just luck. So I just want us to be prepared, especially if free trail is going to be instrumental in starting the Sea Otter of trail running. Tell me about the event with Rebecca Rush. You mentioned this to me briefly when we talked on the phone. I want to hear all about it. And I know you brought some cool data as it relates to, viewership and, the fan element of cycling right now.
Yeah, it was really cool. So Friday afternoon, Rebecca organized this panel of 5 speakers and a Q&A and networking session. I went to go check it out and to support Rebecca because she's a listener to the show, and we extend this to all the listeners of our show. Uh, no, she organized it kinda last minute and just put it out, a week or 2 ahead of time. "Come meet us at 4 p.m. We're gonna do this thing." And what was cool about it was that it was a networking event first and foremost. So you got there, you put your name on a little name tag and your affiliation with whatever brand or company you were with, and they just had like a 20, 30-minute kinda get to know each other networking session. Then they went into a panel discussion about women in sports and in the industry specifically. So the networking was to kind of get, everybody just connected with each other and also to help other people get into the industry directly. And then they did a Q&A at the end of that and then followed that with a networking jam after that. So they really put a lot of effort in just connecting everybody together, and I think I was surprised. I think Rebecca, speaking to her afterwards, seemed pretty surprised at the turnout. It was probably 300-400 people. It was the busiest I've seen that Sierra Nevada beer garden over the course of the entire event. I mean, it was packed with people, which was really cool to see. And they had someone from Zwift who I believe was like their head of community. They had somebody who used to work at Zwift. She was on the DEI initiatives. There was a journalist, and I'm spacing on what the other person was, and they had like a moderator. And of course, Rebecca was on there as well. And they talked a lot about their experiences in the industry, how they got in, just kind of like a lot of really helpful stuff for people to wrap their heads around what it's like to be in the industry, how they got to where they were, how they've supported each other, what are the things that have worked well. And then they asked a lot of, the Q&A afterwards I thought was really insightful. One of the interesting stats that came out of this, which sort of really surprised me, they were talking about the viewership of cycling events. And if you're not familiar, there's an event called the Tour de Femme, which is basically the women's version of the Tour de France. And this has been building over time over the last couple of years. The Tour de France, of course, is a men's only thing. So they just pretty much put a female peloton together and ran the same event. And the data point that they shared during the meeting, and hopefully I'm right on this one, but basically the viewership of the Tour de Femmes was number 2 overall. First place, obviously, Tour de France, then Tour de France, then the Giro d'Italia, which is one of the biggest road cycling races in the world. So the women's Tour de France actually beat that out. That is incredible to me, but it tracks with our whole discussion about how it's not about anything other than the storyline. And the Tour de France storyline is a really incredible storyline to follow. So it tracks that the Tour de Femmes would actually be really interesting and bring lots and lots of people in to see how it was going to go. Uh, I'm excited to hear this stuff, and these are just additional talking points as we continue to grow the sport, as we continue to grow, women in sports. Like, here's another example of like this is working, this is powerful. People want to see this stuff, and you should make it available. Now, the discussion that they had as the panel wasn't necessarily just about female athletes. It was really about the industry side of it too, like how you can get a job in the industry, how you can be a part of the bike industry, and how you can kind of get in the door in any sense. So it wasn't just about like what it's like to be a pro cyclist or anything like that. And I thought that the way that they kind of spoke to the different ranges of their women's involvement in an industry like this was really, really fascinating. And I think they recorded it and talked to Rebecca about like, hey, where is that audio? Is there, what are you going to do with it? Make sure that you make this stuff available because
Let's put
it
it
was
in the second
amazing.
nature feed. Come on, Rebecca, give us the audio.
That would be sick.
That
I just think telling these stories and sharing this information out, it's only going to help. And I believe she's got another one of these panels planned at the Outside Festival later this
I
summer.
think in June in
So
Denver is when that is.
yeah,
Yeah.
so she's definitely onto something here, and the turnout at Sea Otter was really, really encouraging.
Rad. Zwift is an interesting case study because I think they're the title sponsor of the Tour de Femmes. So it'd be interesting
Mm.
to know how that sponsorship mapped to exposure for the brand and ultimately growth and sales membership subscription for their product. I haven't ever used Zwift, but I know it's sort of a viral sensation for folks in the bike industry who spend time on their trainer, especially during the winter months. Very,
It's
very
pretty
cool.
fun.
What else
Yeah.
in terms of like winners and losers? Any awesome new products, cool new disruptive brands in the space?
I'll tell you, the most awesome product was the custom trials frame that Marin Bikes gave me.
Hell yeah, you
That
sent me
was
a pic.
that was my highlight for sure. Uh, that was a cool moment. That was the first day there. They gave me a bike and just thanked
You're
me
gonna have
for,
to edit this
something good.
into the YouTube video. You're gonna have to take that video and put it up.
It was, yeah, man, that was such a cool moment for me. I've been working really hard to deliver value to Marin as a company with the intention that we're going to work together on a bigger level as things continue to go on. And that was a great signal for me to know that, like, hey, this is one of three bikes in the world, and you now have it. This is our way of saying thank you for what you've done over the past couple months, and more to come.
Uh,
So that was really special for me, and I think did you have
well, I
something?
was just gonna say, now let's make it personal because let's bring it back to the fact that you just left your job. You're all in as an athlete slash creator. It's a vulnerable place to be. This is an immense opportunity to do networking, connect with people in the space who you might be able to collaborate with, either from a brand perspective, other creators. Walking away from it, do you feel like it was a success for Super Rider? Any other takeaways that you can apply back to your own business?
I'd say it was a success. And one of the discussions I was having in our DMs with Mark, a guy named Mark, was about how to approach sponsors, how to get people kind of in the mix. And for me, the biggest goal at Sea Otter was to just get FaceTime with people so that I have a little bit more context and they have context of who I am when it comes to that further discussion. And they can kind of put a face to the name a little bit. I had this really fun idea, which I didn't do, and I'm sure it's like borderline unethical. But wouldn't it be funny if next year at Sea Otter, I hired like 20 actors off of TaskRabbit or something? And then every time I went to a meeting with a brand, they like rushed the booth to be like, oh, that's Aaron from Super Rider. Like, would that add an extra zero to the overall balance sheet for Super Rider just by the nature of like, whoa, that dude's got a huge following? I think it'd be kind of fun. And yeah, it's probably super unethical, but actually, like, there's hundreds of thousands of people watching my stuff. Like, it would be a fair representation. I don't know. Maybe that's too much.
Well, I think that was actually already happening, at least from your description to me. It does sound like you get recognized in public now based on those who are subscribed to your YouTube channel and follow your content.
I will say though that just to go back to the point about building relationships with sponsors, right? Like you have to start with value. You have to start with a promise. And I think so many people go out there with this idea of like a sort of one hit wonder style relationship with a sponsor of like, oh, if they were to just sponsor me for this one thing and I'm going to do this thing if I get sponsored. And my approach to the partnerships that I have, Marin, for example, is like, let me show them the value that I'm creating. Let me give them a preview of what that looks like and how I kind of see it going. And then let me have a conversation with them about hey, this is where I would like to go with this stuff. And here's where I see us working together. What are the things that you're after? And let's talk about how that might fit into this discussion as we go. But I'm not necessarily going to not do it. Like, I'm still doing this whether you're here or not. You probably want to be in, otherwise somebody else might come and swoop me.
Yeah.
Um, but like showing them a preview of like what's to come, and also showing them that that I'm going to be doing this for a long time,
Hmm.
and that it's not contingent on their partnership or not if this thing's going to happen. I think having that context and being able to message that when I do talk to them over email or in person is a really important part of that, to give them the foundation that I'm not just doing this because they gave me, help one time,
Yeah.
but like I'm doing this no matter what. You're joining in because I'm going to be doing this a lot, as opposed to like, I'm not going to be able to do this without you. I think it changes the conversation quite a bit. And I think it puts me in a really good position for future conversations of like, oh, we see what you're doing. We get the people that you're reaching. We would like to be part of that. That's the whole thing about pressing publish on content in the first place. It makes you this credible resource. And because you can actually reach, you've proven that you can reach all these people, it gives the partners something to kind of latch onto, as opposed to this theoretical idea of I'm going to do X.
Yeah.
There's a lot of big question marks, and not a lot of yeah, it's a lot harder to sell that.
So maybe in closing on the Sea Otter topic, unless you have anything else to add, I'll just respond to your statement because it conjured some important stuff that we talk about at Free Trail too. And this is something that I think we talked about in episode 4, the idea of delivering value first. And we go into every conversation with potential partners with that attitude, and actually proactively ask the question, in what ways would this be a win for you guys? Like, what are you truly looking to get out of an activation or a partnership in the trail running space? And using that information to then actually craft the pitch deck that we ultimately deliver. So, absorbing that information, what is the priority of this brand? And are we in a position to actually deliver against it? And then, if we are, craft a proposal about what do we think we can do to help you achieve that goal? What do we think a fair price for that effort is? And then you have a great platform or foundation from which you can, extend the conversation, develop the partnership, and actually take it to market. Or conversely, if we're not in a position to help you execute against that goal, we don't waste our time to even craft the proposal. We say, hey, best of luck, sounds like a great project, we're probably not the best people to plug in for this specific thing. And we actually had, for the first time, an instance of this happening where it was an awesome brand, an awesome project, but for other reasons, we didn't feel like we were in a good position to do it. So we recommended other people to help them. And I think that was the right way to go about it, because then that brand is not leaving us with a bad taste. They understood why we couldn't do it. And we left them with a recommendation of, if it's not us, here's somebody else who might be able to execute against those priorities, so that in the future, if they do have a project that aligns with Free Trail and our capabilities, will be, among the first people that they think of. So delivering value first and cultivating those relationships, a great way to go. And I'm sure you made progress on that front at Sea Otter. Any other closing remarks on Sea Otter before we move on?
Can't wait for next year.
Hell yeah, I'm
Hopefully
coming.
onwards and upwards.
I'm coming. Live pod. We'll have Rebecca Rush on and we'll talk all things bike biz. All right. Topic number 2, stuff happening in Portland. CNBC published an article, I think it was a couple weeks ago at this point, that you sent this to me. The title was Nike CEO blames remote work for innovation slowdown, saying it's too hard to build disruptive products on Zoom. So remote work for the company's innovation slowdown. That's the excuse from John Donahoe, Nike's CEO. It's sort of the, at least, justification for what the public perceives as a dearth of new innovation in the market. And their stock has been punished as a result of this. Your response, Aaron Lutzi?
There's a lot to unpack here. First of all, I call BS on the remote work. Maybe don't lay people off all the time, and you'd be able to retain some decent talent. I mean, look, we saw that stat about all the people who are leaving Nike to go work at all
I
the
have
other
some of those stats
brands.
here. We can bring them
Yeah,
up.
perfect. A lot of people are leaving Nike to go work for On, to work for all these other companies that are out there doing really innovative and cool stuff. Nike is, yeah, sure, the big dog, but I think that in the past, it used to be Nike, this big giant, and everyone else was fighting for like 1% market share. But in a way, like David is kind of like taking the stones to Goliath here. And now Nike's got to have to, fight for it. And they are losing talent to a lot of other brands that are eating their market share. Look at Lululemon, look at On Running, look at all these brands that are coming up and just stealing market share left and right. So I think Nike is going to have to work for it, whereas in the past maybe they haven't had to go as hard to maintain their market share.
So we talked about this in our Sea Otter convo, but it's relevant here. So just to add a finer point to it, the COVID euphoria, every business boomed, Nike included, surge of inventory. Then there's the slowdown in the market. You're stuck and handcuffed with this dead inventory that needs to move in order to have the revenue to reinvest in innovation. I have a feeling that this story is also relevant to Nike and a lot of other players. And because of Nike's size, maybe it shows up a little bit more dramatically for them. So here we can have a little bit of a debate, or at least a friendly disagreement here, Lutzi, because you and I both worked remotely before it was cool. We were just talking about this way before people went remote due to COVID. You and I were working remotely. But it is true that, like, especially in hard times in business, with Nike, there are a lot of these new competitors. You got to pick up your game, and you need to know who's on the bus and who's not on the bus. And you need to instill a sense of urgency in the team to say, hey, we are on our back foot right now, and business is competition. Do you want to compete? And if so, here's the ground rules to compete. You got to come into the office and we go shoulder to shoulder together and we compete together. In that sense, I'm sympathetic with John Donahoe. And for our tiny, tiny business, Free Trail, we do notice that when we're all together, it's a different energy. We're way more productive. And there are certain elements of spontaneity that only occur in the office. And actually, going back to my epiphany at the start of this episode, like I mentioned, we went into that back room at the Quilt HQ in Silicon Valley, and you could feel it. Like, these guys are building something from the ground up, and they need the high IQ and the high EQ people working together to create something in the world. So again, to that extent, I'm sympathetic with Donahoe, and I think that this is a reflection of the urgency that the company's feeling right now.
I don't think that having everybody centered in Portland, Oregon, or Beaverton, Oregon, which is not the same, but I don't think that you get the best talent when you force them to live in a distant suburb of Portland, Oregon. I just don't see it. There are amazing designers in Detroit, Michigan, in Nashville, Tennessee, in Atlanta. And the fact that you have to be in a physical location to be able to contribute to a brand of that size is laughable in my mind. Like, I just don't think that geographic location is the reason why Nike can't be successful. I think that ideas win out no matter where they come from, and their willingness to chop that off from their process is a horrible idea. And it's important, sure, to bring people together for moments like that, a co-location where you fly everybody in for, a 4-day session or something, but demanding that everybody work out of this office. I don't know how much office time you've done in the past in bigger companies, but I've spent some time here and there, and I can tell you that when you work a 9 to 5 in an office setting, you actually spend most of your time going from meeting to meeting talking about stuff that doesn't really matter. When you need to be creative and actually design something or edit something or do whatever, you kind of need to have your space and not be interrupted. You need to get into the flow. And there's nothing worse for flow than having people come knock on your desk and ask you some random question. I don't know how the people at Red Bull HQ actually were as productive as they were, because there's no way I could have done it. I had to be able to like close the door to my office and just lock in on what I needed to do.
What an interesting conundrum for culture and team building. One of the things that came to my mind is there are these impending layoffs coming down the pipe at Nike that everybody knows about and that they've announced. I think it's somewhere in the neighborhood of 700 workers. And so maybe forcing people to come back to the office is a good way to make people quit, right? When you introduce like, hey, instead of 2 days a week, you need to be in 4 days a week. I'm not exactly sure what the parameters are that they're going to be requiring, but maybe that's the way that they encourage those who during COVID moved to different geographies and for whom it's impractical to return to office to go ahead and resign themselves. That probably makes it so that Nike doesn't have to do the layoffs and have those painful conversations, but also probably not have to pay a severance package. So who knows? I think the CEO, this statement probably indicates that they're feeling the pressure and that they're moving in a specific direction. We can debate whether that's the right direction, but the fact remains that Nike's a little bit on the ropes right now, which is unusual even in their 60-year history.
Absolutely. And I think when it all comes down to it, they're going to lose some really good talent that could have probably helped bail them out of the situation. Remote work is such a difficult thing to manage, sure. And you think also though, like the people that are driving into Beaverton, how much time are you actually losing to their commute and all these other things?
Yeah.
It's never easy, right? There's no way to go about it, but it's difficult that just because you aren't able to be there physically, you now have zero value to the company seems wrong.
Yeah. So speaking of the other businesses in the Portland, Oregon area, Nike has
Mhm.
created this ecosystem. It has basically become the Silicon Valley of the footwear and apparel business. Adidas has a massive footwear there. Under Armour, we've talked about that on the show. On Running, probably the most disruptive brand in the space, along with Hoka, who also has a design studio there. Columbia's longtime home is there. Lululemon's footwear design studio is there. Arc'teryx's footwear design studio is there. Of course, my homeboys from Speedland are from Portland, Oregon. So the next topic that we wanted to discuss as it relates to what's happening in Portland is that Sourcing Journal, an online publication, published a piece called $125 million. The $125 million Made in Old Town project aims to transform Portland into footwear manufacturing mecca. Aaron, you want to get us started on this one? Because this was really cool and interesting to me, and something that I think will be massively valuable to the business ecosystem there, and therefore to the tax paying base and probably to the city as a whole.
Yeah. Oregon is kind of an interesting place. There's not a lot of companies that are just rushing to get to Oregon, to be honest. You go to Seattle and there's all kinds of, companies starting up there, or obviously down in the Bay, you have the same thing. Portland's pretty slow moving, and I'm not sure if there's some sort of tax thing that prevents people from really wanting to be here or what. But you don't see a lot of companies starting up. Most of the brands that are here are either agencies or they are some sort of kind of established brand like Columbia, like Nike. You don't see a lot of new companies starting in Oregon. It's usually somebody who's been here for quite some time. This also kind of cuts back to my Jodorowsky Dune reference, where the film wasn't made, but all the people that left it went and started and did something else that was amazing. All these people that are getting jettisoned from some of these brands that are having layoffs are going to end up potentially starting new companies. You almost wonder if the people who are going to be the biggest beneficiaries of that 125 million are actually ex Nike employees with an idea. You know, I don't know if Speedland or Columbia or anybody else, I don't know if they're going to be the ones that benefit from it. Or I feel like it might actually be a lot of those people that have come from Adidas and Nike that want to take advantage of that and start something fresh.
So I'm going to just read a quick excerpt from the article here. It says Portland, Oregon lawmakers last month approved phase one funding for a $125 million effort aimed at building out a green manufacturing campus for shoes and apparel. The Made in Old Town development project will revitalize 10 buildings and 4 city blocks at the center of a once vibrant manufacturing district, with the goal of creating a mecca for innovation and onshoring. So, what you were just saying, layoffs at Nike, plus new resources for creative product designers and developers in effort to create an ecosystem for innovation and onshoring, which for our listeners means bringing manufacturing back to the United States. This is actually something that is relevant. In talking to the guys at Speedland, we at slash they have an ambition to eventually make the product in the US. And what they've said is that it's physically impossible. There are no footwear manufacturers in the United States that can make a Speedland shoe, which is kind of a remarkable thing. You would think there would at least be some obscure footwear manufacturing center in the Northeast that could make a Speedland shoe. Obviously, New Balance is famous for doing a lot of their footwear manufacturing here in the US. But the fact is that a lot of that expertise, that technology has been offshored mostly to Asia. So what you're saying though, Aaron, is that with these resources, with potential, volatility in the market as a result of what's going on at Nike and maybe the downstream implications for other brands, do those two things coalesce into some sort of renaissance in the footwear brand ecosystem where a bunch of these talented designers and developers now have resources to kick off their own thing in Portland, Oregon?
There was something in downtown Portland called the Pencil Academy. I'm not sure if it still exists or not, but it was a footwear design school. And it was from, I believe the guy was an ex Nike guy, ex Adidas maybe, but he brought students in and would do like this intensive academy where they would work on sketching and they'd work on materials, they'd work through designing all these cool things. And that was around for quite some time as a way for people to get the education that they needed to then become viable candidates at Nike, Adidas, you name it. I wonder, thinking about how Portland is also set up, you have these big brands like Nike and Adidas, Columbia. O'Keen is another shoe brand in Portland
Mm-hmm.
that I'm not sure if you mentioned. You have all these big brands, and then you also have agencies to support those brands. And that's like 50-50. Like if you have a job in Portland, it's probably one of those two, or you're a barista. Uh,
Or you work at a craft brewery.
yeah.
Thank God for all four of those categories.
Yes, we appreciate you all. Ultimately, if there's this big effort being put into Old Town, and it's manufacturing specific. I wonder if there's a new style of agency that's specific to design and prototyping and doing those first runs of manufacturing the shoes for all of the brands. If that's a new style, I'm sure there are agencies out there, some small design boutiques that do this kind of thing. But I wonder if that's going to be the lead thing that benefits from this the most. I'd just be really surprised to see a full on manufacturing thing set up in Old Town, where they're just like firing out Nikes all
I
day.
think I think don't quote me on this, but that it was emphasizing 3D printing technology, and I think there's an apparel component to this too. I'll link to the article in the show notes of the episode so people can go a little bit deeper. But a really interesting thing, and I think just something that to further reinforce Portland to be, as I said, sort of the Silicon Valley of the footwear and apparel industry, and anything that the city can do to reinforce that in the local economy is great for Portland because obviously those big industries do provide a lot of the jobs and therefore the tax revenue to the city to continue to be one of the coolest cities on the West Coast. So coming back to what you just mentioned, I pulled up that LinkedIn post that I sent to you, and I'm just going to read a quick thing here and then we can riff on this before we close with brand product content. what this individual says. His name is Andy Gooday. Looks like an leadership exec. Sorry, I'll link to his LinkedIn profile in the show notes. But his post says, it starts with the struggle that Nike and Adidas are currently facing is not only on the commercial front, but also in the war for talent. In challenging times, an organization can suffer from, quote, brain drain. What happens when the most talented employees leave for new pastures and are replaced by less talented employees? And so basically, his post takes a lot of the job data that I think he sourced from LinkedIn itself. And some of the interesting findings were that brands like On were draining brands like Nike and Adidas. In other words, a lot of talent, when you analyze movement on LinkedIn, when people change their job descriptions on that digital platform, people from Nike and Adidas are disproportionately moving to brands like On and not vice versa. Your response, Aaron?
I think these brands on and everyone else are looking for top tier talent, and people coming from Nike and Adidas are, the most qualified, right, to bring over the knowledge that they've built over decades of time there and applying it to these brands. On is basically getting this advantage, drafting off all the lessons that Nike and Adidas have learned, just being able to pull talent directly from them. On is interesting because it's still on the way up. They're doing really exciting stuff. And if you're an employee at Nike or Adidas, you look at On and you're like, whoa, they're small enough that I could go in there and make a difference. You go to Nike, there's thousands of people on campus and you have no idea what any of them do. You're a very tiny cog in a very large machine. You go to a place like On and you can actually make a difference and do something and implement your ideas and help make a real change on a brand that's just absolutely crushing right now.
Mm,
And I think that's all it really takes. Like, oh, wow, I get to actually make a difference at my job. Isn't that what we all kind of want in the first place?
totally. Totally. What a great point. And this is something I've talked about with a lot of people who've been mentoring and advising me, and my thing is just like, man, I really just like want to have an impact. And I feel like everybody, that's their goal in their career, is like to in some way have an impact on the organization or on the market that they're working within. And maybe some of this movement is a reflection of that innate human instinct. One other stat before we sort of close here. This comes from the same LinkedIn post. He says the employee attrition at Lululemon is much higher than any other featured business. This is partly explained by a layoff program in October 2023, but this cannot account for over 1/3 of their workforce leaving in the last 12 months. Expect to see the attrition levels jump for other businesses this year. So again, there is some distress in the industry. Lululemon, 37% of their employee base turned over in the last 12 months. The next highest was Under Armour at 20%, then New Balance at 14. So part of that explained by a layoff program, but maybe part of that not explained or open to interpretation. Shall we close with
Interesting.
BPC?
Yeah, I just want to go back really quickly to that remote thing because you said something that kind of caught my attention when it comes to making an impact. And we talked a lot about remote work and it not potentially working for Nike. And what it made me think about, your last comment was, maybe all remote work is not created equal, in that remote work, when you feel like you're not actually making a difference, does feel like it's not going anywhere. I'm wasting my time. Remote work, when you feel like you're making a difference, is totally fine and you can stay motivated. And so Nike's remote work might not be working because people don't feel like they're doing anything. But I can tell you from, actually the entire time I worked at Red Bull, 12 years, I was remote. I started in Cincinnati, Ohio. And yeah, I was always somewhere else. I never worked out of an office, but I always felt like I was making a difference. I always felt like it was a creative outlet for me. And I was the most engaged I've probably ever been in any job as a result.
Yeah.
So I guess all things aren't equal. And I don't know if that applies to what's happening at Lululemon necessarily, but I would imagine that's probably one of the main symptoms of what's happening at Nike.
Have you read The Hard Thing About Hard Things by Ben Horowitz?
No, but it's on my list.
He describes the difference between a wartime CEO and a peacetime CEO, and you can probably guess what he means by that. In good times or times of emergency, what sort of leadership qualities do you need to navigate those moments? And so maybe not all remote work is created equal, but also there's a time and a place for remote work. My feeling is that John Donahoe is signaling like, hey, we're like on the ropes here. Are you on the team or are you not on the team? And if you're on the team, this is a symbolic way of us showing to each other that we're on the team. You come in and we lock arms and we compete in the marketplace. If you're not on the team, if you want to stay at home and sit on your laptop, there's another place that'll hire you. I don't know. I'm sympathetic to his point of view in that respect because I have firsthand knowledge of just how hard it is to create anything in the world and just how, I mean, as somebody who's only been entrepreneurial once in my life and has otherwise been an employee, I never appreciated like what leadership goes through when they're confronted with like the big problems of their businesses. And so I don't know. I think employees can be more sympathetic to the leadership, and certainly leadership can be more sympathetic to the employees. And eventually you got to find something that it behooves and benefits the whole team, because otherwise, you're pissing each other off and it craters the culture.
Absolutely. And the thing with Nike is that they have an almost unlimited amount of people that would love to come and work at
Yeah.
Nike. So they can afford to, make difficult rules and make people really commit and be there and all that stuff. And they'll still have thousands of people applying for every single job that they open up.
And speaking of which, they just picked off the creative director from the North Face, bringing things full circle. Tim
There you go.
Hamilton. I think I just saw on LinkedIn that he is now on board at the mothership there in Beaverton, Oregon. Brand product content, Aaron. You want to go first or should I?
I can go first. I ran into this company at Sea Otter. This is probably one of the more interesting things that I caught at Sea Otter. It's a company called Alec, like Smart Alec, and they are partnering with Smith, which is a sunglasses company. They also make helmets and outerwear. Smith is actually also based in Portland. And what this thing does, it's actually built into the helmet. And when you have a really gnarly crash where there's like an accelerometer that denotes that you crashed really hard, it actually sends a message to like your emergency contact, like, yo, this guy had a really bad crash. And you have, I believe it's like 15 seconds to deactivate the thing on your phone before it like calls people. There's also another layer to it, is that if other people also have the app and they're within like a mile of you, that'll also signal to them that, hey, this guy had a crash, go check in on this guy. And it will help, I think there's GPS to it. There's all these different
Holy
elements.
shit. That's going to
Yeah,
save
pretty
some
rad.
lives.
For sure, for sure. When I started riding in the warehouse, my wife made me get an Apple Watch because she thought maybe the accelerometer would be enough to, if I did have a bad crash, but thankfully I did not. But that's the only reason why I actually have an Apple Watch, is because of that.
Your
So,
wife's a doctor,
but
we should say.
yes, yes. And so this helmet version is an even more advanced and better version of that. And I thought that was the coolest thing. And yeah, I'm surprised that this isn't something that existed a long time ago, but I'm happy that it now exists.
Sweet. Awesome. I'm going to look that up. Okay, I've got a brand for you. I've got another piece of content too that I can share. Sort of a plug for Free Trail. Let's start with the brand. Check this brand out, Lucy. Samaya Equipment. Samaya. I just discovered these folks. They're French. They're based in Annecy, France, which is sort of like the European Silicon Valley of the outdoor industry. And it's exactly my vibe. I just discovered them. Do you have the website up?
Oh no.
Okay. Look them up when you have time. Follow them on Instagram. But it's like this simple logo, clean design, premium technical apparels. They started in tents and backpacks, it seems like. And they just announced the pre-order for their new products that are being released, which is more sort of tents and backpacks. So I had to buy a pack. It was called the Alpine Pace Pack. And I just really, I don't know, this is exactly the type of brand that I really like, just based on the aesthetic and the positioning. One thing that was really strange about the brand is that you cannot even look at any of the new products without punching your email address in, which adds an insane level of friction. So, for example, I left them a comment on their Instagram account saying, "Hey, I'm trying to check out some of your products, but it won't let me look at it without putting my email address in." And they responded, "Yeah, you got to put your email address in to even look at the products." So anyway, I don't know if that's like a cool thing or something that like irritates me, but it's definitely different, you know? Like I had to put my email address in to even look at the products that they're pre-ordering, and I went ahead and ordered one myself. It's like a almost a $300 backpack. So I'm looking forward to checking it out. But this is the exact type of brand that I could see growing into doing more like technical outerwear or other outdoor equipment. You can follow them on Instagram at Samaya_equipment. It's SAMAYA_equipment. You can check them out. Again, French based outdoor brand. So that was my brand. On content, I just want to give a quick plug. This weekend, Free Trail is going to be up in Auburn, California, the endurance capital of the world, for the Canyons by UTMB races. And we're going to be doing our trademarked trail gating content around the races. So you can check out our pre-race and post-race shows up there. Well, I'm sure we'll be doing a lot of stuff on social media. You can check us out on Instagram. And we just posted today, Aaron, I don't know if you saw, but Ryan made a dope video with Adam Peterman from our trip to Missoula. We captured an awesome training day with him. So that's a piece of content. And one last thing that's relevant to this conversation, I didn't plan to share it, but Portland, Oregon has been home to a lot of cool, like small maker based businesses, and farmers market culture is a huge thing in Oregon. And I read a book a
Oh
couple
yeah.
years ago called Supermaker by Jamie Schmidt, who started Schmidt's Natural Deodorant, which he sold to Unilever for $100 million. It's a cool book for people who are entrepreneurial or working on tinkering with a product. So I just shared three. Any responses before we close things down?
I now have my reading lined up. You dropped like 2 books on this podcast that I haven't read, which is rare. Usually I've like read or, I'd heard of the first one, but I hadn't read either one of these. So I got my reading cut out for me. You and I are both such huge bookworms that usually we're on the same page, and I've somehow,
Dude,
I
I've
don't
been
know.
slacking, bro. We should talk about this on a future episode, but I've been slacking because I've been in the box, metaphorically speaking, way too much work. I've got Andre Agassi's book open sitting next to my bed. The book is called Open. It's not physically open because I haven't opened it, but I have heard from everybody that it's exactly like straight, like center of the bullseye for content that I would love, and I just haven't been able to get myself to open a freaking book for like a month or two. So shame me publicly.
It happens to the best of us, man. It happens to the best of us. Well, you could always read Extreme Ownership before you get to that. That'll give you a good kick in the butt
Yeah,
to
right.
get after it,
Yeah, or
right?
can't hurt me, get Goggins to start shaming me into opening a book again.
He's an ultra runner. You don't have him on speed dial. He could just call you in the morning and get you
Yeah,
going.
well, we're gonna have him on the pod eventually.
That'll be interesting.
Aaron, another episode done and dusted, episode 6. If you're listening to the show, make sure you jump into our DMs on Instagram at secondnature.media. Let us know if you have any feedback. Send us any prompts of things you want us to discuss on the show. I'm heading to Auburn this weekend. You got any plans?
I'm going to Europe. So no big
That's
deal.
right. Next
No,
next week
I'm-
we're recording while you're in Europe, and we're going to be celebrating something pretty cool while you're there.
yeah, I'm excited for that one.
Hell yeah. All right. Thanks everybody for listening. We'll see you next week.